Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Tonight we wish to discuss with you a very interesting subject in our opinion. It is national champion skydiving. In order to deal with this particular subject, we're going to welcome to our program a guest, and along with our guest a small portion of a film in which we will show skydiving and then discuss it with our guest. It is a pleasure to welcome Jeff Ragg to the program. He is a native of St. Joseph, Michigan. Following his growing up in that particular state, he joined the Air Force, and upon that completion he came to North Idaho College, where he is a student. Jeff is certainly qualified to deal with this subject in that he is one of the four-man team United States national champions in skydiving for this year, 1978. Jeff, it's a pleasure having you on our program.
Thanks, Tony.
Joining with me in questioning our guest this evening will be two regular members of our panel. First of all is Mary Lou Reed, who holds a baccalaureate degree from Mills College in California and did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University in New York City. As always, Lou, welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Also, another regular member of the panel is Dr. Ken Wright. Dr. Wright holds a baccalaureate degree from Portland State University and his PhD in the field of chemistry from the University of Idaho, and is a member of the faculty teaching in the field of chemistry at North Idaho College. Ken, as always, welcome once again.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here for this program.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we commence our questioning with our guest this evening, we're going to deviate from our format by showing approximately 9 minutes of a film that was produced by the Big Sky Films from Whitefish, Montana. We show our appreciation by expressing it to you, the audience, and that organization for allowing us to borrow that film. During its presentation, we will ask Jeff throughout the 9 minutes to describe to you what's going on, but it mainly deals with the different formations that take place during skydiving. Now let us go to the film at this time.
This is the national and world champion 8-man team in practice prior to their winning their first national title. Their team name is Mirror Image. The skydives were done at Hope Valley, California. It's a popular parachute resort area. They've jumped out of a DC-3 and are now in the process of making their first formation on the jump. Skydiving now, or particularly what these guys are doing, is called relative work. That's where you maneuver in free fall with other skydivers. They have a specific pre-choreographed set of maneuvers where everybody has to be holding on to each other in a very specified manner. The team, there are 10 of them, I believe, on this jump. They have to walk through this carefully on the ground and line up their exit in the airplane and jump out, and as they accelerate towards the earth up to about 120 miles an hour, they have to use their arms and legs to deflect air and fly around very much like an airplane and maneuver in this aerial ballet. Keep in mind, all the time this is going on, they're falling at a rate of about 10,000 feet a minute. Here, one of the jumpers showing how he can maneuver his arms and legs in his body and fall by the photographer, who is also in free fall. Okay, this is the beginning of another jump. You can see the formation taking shape. Each jumper is in a specific position, and as the formation develops, he closes into his slot. Upon the completion of the formation, the signals are transferred around the jump, usually visual cues, a nod of the head or a shake of the hand. And then when everyone in the jump knows, they sequence through to the second formation. Each person has to let go, and then they once again use their arms and legs to deflect air, to propel themselves around with respect to one another. to complete the second formation. Usually, as jumpers start hooking up with one another, they start slowing down their rate of descent towards the earth so that another jumper in close proximity to them has to spread himself out more so he can slow down and stay even with the rest of the formation. They've now formed a formation called a double bipole, which is two separate four-man formations, oddly enough called bipoles, that are linked. Okay, this team, mirror image, made about 150 practice jumps prior to competing in the national championships last summer. This is one of the early stage jumps. They haven't got their whole team act completely together yet. You can see as the jumpers, at the end of the jump, they separate themselves from one another and open their parachutes. Okay, the beginning of another jump. The jumpers have hooked up into a four-man jump. This specific type of jump is called a four-in, one-out maneuver, where they have a series of four-man formations, but there being five people in the air at the same time. One of the jumpers has to be out of each formation. The jumpers go through the preset series as fast as they can. This is very similar to what our team does in free fall. You just hurry and skydive to the best of your ability, and hope the judges see it the way you saw it.
I think, Jeff, it might be appropriate to explain once again to the audience that although this appears to be very slow and that you're there in the air for some time, that it really isn't, that it takes precision in a very quick amount of time. I don't think the film reveals that as much as actuality.
That's a good point, Tony. In four-man skydiving, we have 35 seconds to complete a series of maneuvers that are predetermined by the judges. Typically, on one jump, we'll do 6 to 8 different formations each time. So there's actually very little time to do it all. You've got to hurry. These films are all, well, most of it is in slow motion, so you're not really getting the actual time sense of what we're doing. Although usually a skydiver is keyed up enough so that it actually, to him, looks slow motion-ish. But in this case, this is, I'm sure, significantly less than half speed, what you're actually seeing. This jump was probably done all in significantly less than 60 seconds.
Also, we might point out to the audience that if you do not take it very serious, a particular jump, and perform adequately, and going back and doing it again, if you're putting it on film, as this is, it becomes rather expensive, doesn't it, having to go back up each time with the plane and so forth?
Yes. The photographers, of course, as professionals, they require compensation for their services, and the finished product film is not cheap. And so when one is trying to get some footage in the air, one generally tries to make the skydives go as smoothly as possible so as not to have to reshoot a sequence. This whole film here is a training film, actually, and therefore they filmed it from the point of view to see what they could learn by watching themselves, rather than to make a film as an artistic effort to impress somebody with. They wanted to do their best skydives, to watch themselves, and then to critique themselves by watching themselves.
Jeff, do all these formations have names?
Most of them do.
That linkage one, what is that?
Okay, this specific one is called a donut flake. The inner formation is called a donut, where each guy is holding on to the guy's leg in front of him, and then the 4 or 5 men around the edge are called flakers. This is another formation that's a flake formation. It's called a sun flake. The inner formation being just a 5-man circle, which is the classic relative work formation. another generally referred to as a star as opposed to a circle. Although a star can, in the broader sense, refer to any free fall formation. Here's a guy on his back in free fall. You see how easily he controlled himself and turned right over when he wanted to. It's a lot of fun in free fall. Falling at 120 miles an hour.
With that, we come to the conclusion of our film, and once again I would like to thank Jeff and the Big Sky Films in Whitefish, Montana for providing this film. We'll continue our program on this subject by turning to Lou Reed for further questioning.
Jeff, let's try and continue the mood of the film. Would you talk a little bit about the sensation of free falling? This, to someone like me who's never tried it, looks like it's a lot of fun, but it's very unnatural to have to jump out of the airplane in order to get there. What does it really feel like? Do you feel like you're going very fast?
No. My standard answer when asked that question, what does it feel like? It feels windy. You're relatively unprotected in 120 to 180 mile an hour wind stream. And you notice the noise of the wind, the feeling of the wind. It distorts your face a little bit with that kind of breeze against you. There's no real elevator type feeling with your stomach going away somewhere when you fall out. And I don't really know why, because certainly you're experiencing, for a while anyway, zero gravity, only at the beginning of the jump. The actual feeling is freedom. Once you've learned how to skydive, you've learned that the motions you make with your arms and legs guide you around, and exhilaration is a good word that comes into mind.
You said keyed up, and this is the exhilaration you're talking about. And what is so exhilarating? It is the freedom of motion?
Well, I'm sure there's probably some deep built-in little spurt your adrenal gland gives you when you jump out of an airplane. Probably most people that fall off cliffs are keyed up sometime prior to their termination of their fall. I think to a skydiver, it's just such a visually satisfying thing to do, and it's beautiful. The scenery is wonderful. The things you do are wonderful, and it's to me anyway, it's impossible to do without getting keyed up.
Do you actually feel like a bird? Do you feel like you're flying?
Yes, to a large degree, although there's the deep down disappointment of not being able to go back up without an airplane.
Would you talk just a little bit about some of these techniques of maneuvering? Really, it looks like it's very simple. Is it as simple as it looks to turn over, do a somersault?
Yeah, yes, it's actually just that simple. However, you've got, when training someone, you've got to get the idea across to them that everything they do with their arms and legs and head and the rest of their body affects the flow of air over their body. And the flow of air is what determines what their body's doing in the air. If, for example, a person's center of gravity is somewhere around the middle of their body, and if they have a lot more drag generated by their legs, for example, in the bagginess of the jumpsuit, that will mean that the front of their body is pitched downward, and in doing that, you deflect. Since your head is pitched downward, the air that rushes up, hits you underneath, is deflected backwards, and that makes you glide forward in the air. It can be much more subtle than that, though. Just a little cocked hand, for example, can induce a turn. A tilted head can make you turn. If you suddenly tuck your legs up and throw your arms out in front of you, you'll do a back loop, or 2, or 3, or 4, depending how fast you get it going. And it's very complicated in practice when you try to explain it to someone, but in theory, and once you're into the sport, it's like riding a bicycle. Trying to explain it to somebody who's never done it, it defies words. But once you've done it, once you've learned how to do it, it's so simple, there's no explanation necessary.
So everything eventually becomes very natural.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ken Wright.
Jeff, you've been involved in skydiving long enough to have met a lot of people who are skydivers. What do you think causes most of them to get into the sport?
That's a toughie. There's a real broad spectrum of people that are into skydiving. I know lawyers, I know doctors, I know drunks, I know all sorts of people that skydive. I think the common factor is that makes anyone want to jump out of an airplane is it's something different to try. The difference, though, is what makes people keep with the sport, and that's the ones who have the intellectual capacity to overcome the emotional fears of jumping out of an airplane and can appreciate the ballet-like qualities of aerial maneuvering. And it's an artistic satisfaction and a social one, too. You get to meet some interesting people that fall out of airplanes.
What made you get started?
I was in the Air Force at the time in Mountain Home, Idaho, and weekends down there in the desert plateau are dull, and I needed something to do. I needed something to do desperately as a matter of sanity, maintaining my sanity or whatever I had left of it. And I got involved with a civilian parachute club in Boise, Idaho, a place called Jump West Parachute Center. It became something to do on weekends. Initially, it was probably just something to do, but after that, it became a consuming recreation, and that was all I did for the last 2 years in the Air Force and the 3 years since then.
So the exhilaration of skydiving really affected you, and you went into it.
Yeah, it snowballed. It snowballed a lot on me.
You've been at the sport what length of time now?
About 5.5 years now.
How long do you think it takes to become proficient at skydiving? I realize that it's going to vary from person to person, but there must be some sort of base time involved.
Yeah, there are people who, just like when they try anything, there are some people who just do well at it at a very low experience level. In general, the United States Parachute Association, which is the governing body of skydiving in the U.S., they issue an expert class license, and they require a minimum of 200 free fall jumps with associated demonstrations of ability. So one can become a titular expert anyway with at least 200 free falls.
Which depends upon your time and money, is how quickly you can get 200 free falls.
To be practical, most hardcore jumpers have difficulty getting more than 200 jumps in 1 year. I've averaged almost exactly 200 a year. My highest year was something over 300. And it gets very expensive. Equipment's not cheap. Skydives themselves average $6 to $8 a piece. And so you run into limitations of time. Generally, you can't make more than 4 or 5 jumps in a day. Of money, when you make 4 or 5 jumps a day, you're costing $40 or $50 a day, and getting the rest of your work done.
Jeff, when I was doing research for the program, I was really surprised, not having a background in this, of how really a new sport this is. And you and I have discussed this some too, and how much more proficient it has come during that short time. My research indicates that the first World Championships were held in Europe in 1957, which was really not that long ago. And at that particular championship meet, there were 15 men, I believe, and 2 women. And by 1973, again, a short period of time elapsed, and we had 145 men and 42 women from 31 countries, whereas in the first championship only 6 countries were represented. Has that growth continued since 1973, or are you continuing to have more and more countries participating all the time?
It's been fairly stable. There are 2 facets of both national and international competition, Tony. The individual events, which most people that don't know anything about skydiving think all people that skydive, their competitive endeavors are limited to guiding their parachute to landing on a target. In those individual events, known as style and accuracy, the communist bloc countries have competed quite heavily for several years. In the last few years, they've filed with the international governing body, the FAI, world records in the relative work events. However, nobody's ever seen them. We've got the word this year, though, that the Russians, the East Germans, and the Chinese intend to compete in the relative work events next year. So there will be an increase in the amount of competition, and politically it will be a much more significant event next year than it has been in any previous years.
Another statistic I want to share with you deals with individual parachuting. Again, at the individual contest in 1957, at the first World Championships, the gentleman who won, he landed 26 meters from the bullseye, and the next individual that came closest was 600 feet away. Yet in 1972, at the same contest, the gentleman who won with 10 jumps averaged an error of about a half an inch. That must be a tremendous improvement over a short period of time. Does this not also indicate that things are really happening in this sport, that it's improving at a very rapid rate, not only in the number participating, but how accurate they're becoming?
The sport has boomed technologically. For years and years, skydiving was supported primarily by ex-military jumpers and just a few crazies thrown in. As the sport grew slowly, it finally became able to support its own technology and its own industry. And when that happened, the design emphasis of the equipment changed radically. And now the ultimate in the technology is sport generated rather than military generated. And the new parachutes that people are using have an amazing effect on the popularity of the sport. They land so much softer. They're so much easier to guide. The type of parachute used in the very first World Championships probably had a forward speed on the order of 3 or 4 miles an hour. The parachute I jump goes 20 or 25 miles an hour. He would land probably like jumping off about a 15-foot ladder. I land like jumping off about a 3-foot ladder. Mm-hmm. And it's so much easier on the body now.
Well, with this kind of development, it has benefits to areas outside the sport, doesn't it? In the military of the United States, I would think that they have learned and accepted some of these improvements. In other words, in future military maneuvers, this might even be a benefit.
Yeah, the military right now has just started to get some input from the sport industry, and they're working quite seriously with the new modern sport-generated aerodynamic type parachutes. And they do have quite a significant military application if they're used properly.
Lou Reed.
Well, Jeff, you have said that you got hooked on this whole sport at a very early stage in the game, but how on earth did you decide to go into competitive skydiving? How did that come about? That
happened when I moved up here 3 years ago. There was a nucleus of jumpers in this area that were looking for something a little more in skydiving. And we just kind of gravitated towards one another, and next thing you know, somebody's saying, why don't we put a little team together? We want to make some serious skydives. You can have a lot more fun when you're skydiving as a team, because a skydive is more satisfying when it's more complicated and when it gets done properly. And as a team, you have the advantage of working with one another, and therefore, as time progresses, the skydives get better. Therefore, you're more satisfied.
Well, what are the rules of the competition? Where are the judges? Are the judges also in free fall?
No, that'd be nice, but it's impractical. In our four-man competition, we are shown on the ground what series of maneuvers we have to do, what formations we have to execute, and we know that we have 35 seconds in which to do it. We go up and we exit the airplane, and the judges are on the ground with some big, well, they're called telemeters in the business. They're actually old surplus artillery spotting binocular type arrangements, and they watch us with those, and they can see very clearly what we do for the most part.
Well, are those sort of like school figures then? They tell you what you are expected to do. Mm-hmm. And then is there other competition which permits you to show off?
Right now, no, there's no freestyle aspect of it. One of the main reasons is because of the difficulties in judging. I'm sure everybody's aware of the wide disparity in marks given on the international scene. Politics becomes too much of a figure of an issue when you're judging artistic merit as opposed to simply whether something was done or not done.
So what are the points then that you're scored on?
Okay, we are scored 1 point for each formation we complete properly in order. If, for example, we go up, make the first formation properly, they mark down on their little sheet 1 point. We do the second one properly, we get another point. We don't do the third one properly, they stop scoring there. We get no more points after that, no matter how good we do after that. So you have to do them right, you have to do them in order, and you can't make any mistakes. If the team thinks they've made a mistake, you've got to make a decision right there in mid-jump whether to go back and do it right or to hope the judges missed it.
You took a lot of time, you set out to train before this final competition. What's involved in the training? How do you train? You know what's expected of you then. You know what they're really going to tell you, and you train how?
One of the things we learned early on as competitors was that the more time you spend working a jump on the ground, the better it's going to go in the air. And we typically devote a half hour on the ground to each jump that takes 35 seconds in the air. And even on jumps that we're intimately familiar with, we don't cheat ourselves on ground practice. It's so easy once you get things going wrong in the air to get completely confused and disoriented. And if you grind it in, it goes better. You're less likely to get disoriented.
Thank you. I have some more questions along this line, but I think I'll pass it along to Ken.
Ken, right.
I'll continue because I want to pursue some of these same points. What elevation are you talking about jumping from in the competitive jumps?
Four-man competition is run on an international basis from about 9,000 feet, which actually our 35 seconds of working time expires at about 4,000 feet then. Normally, we don't open our parachutes until 2,000 to 2,500 feet above the ground.
But in competition, you open it sooner, or you're simply not being judged any longer?
Yeah, generally you have time to do formations that you can't get credit for because you're overtime anyway.
Who ends up being the judges on these events? How are the judges selected? Are they ex-skydivers or?
For the most part, there's a judging a judging regimen that persons who want to be judges have to go through to be trained. For the most part, they are ex-skydivers. Frequently, they're skydivers that are temporarily injured, usually due to their own miscalculation. And very frequently, a judge is a non-skydiving spouse of another jumper. And jumpers who are addicted to the sport spend a lot of time out at the airport. And for spouses to stay spouses, frequently they like to spend time out there too. And to minimize boredom, they find somehow they can get involved in the sport. And some of the best judges are non-skydivers.
They're not allowed to judge their spouse, I take it. That would be prohibited.
Well, I don't think there's ever been an objection about that. Skydivers are a pretty sane lot as a rule. I don't think in an international competition there's ever been a spouse-judge conflict of interest, though. I don't think it's ever arisen on an international basis.
How much can you communicate during a dive? Do you use hand signals, or can you do some verbal talking? Totally impossible.
You're essentially limited to nonverbal communication. You can be heard, but you can't communicate a real word. Lip reading helps, but you're essentially limited to shaking your head. That means something went wrong. Pointing if you want someone to go to a specific position. It's difficult. There are times when you wish you could talk something over.
I would imagine. Has anybody attempted to use the built-in communication devices in the helmets yet?
That's
receiver and a transmitter, or is that prohibited?
No, that's not prohibited. In fact, I'm almost certain that'll eventuate sooner or later. one of the problems is in the U.S., which has been in the forefront in the relative work facet of skydiving, most skydivers spend all their excess money doing skydiving, and the money and the technology it would require to put together an adequate in-air communication system is prohibitive. I'm sure it'll happen, though. Our team has discussed it. We discussed it early this year, and it would be nice.
Since you brought up that term, relative work events, again, I want to ask about that. Where's that term come from? What's it mean?
It's an awkward term. I don't know who coined it. I might punch him in the nose. Around the drop zone, it's just shortened up to RW or RDub. It's just defined as working in close proximity to one or more other jumpers in free fall. It doesn't necessarily imply you're hooked up. There are jumps that we do that's called non-contact relative work, where the whole jump is choreographed without touching one another in free fall. And it's a lot harder to do.
Do the judges describe these sequences or events to you in detailed terms, or do they have, like you mentioned, the name of some of these formations that they were using on the film?
Okay.
Judges tell you, you do one of those, you do a sun star. And
okay, for competition, there are a series of pre-published jumps that have been agreed upon and selected by the international committee, and they also have a pool of individual formations. In competition, odd-number dives are drawn from the pre-published complete dive list, and even-number dives have the individual formations drawn one at a time out of the hat. They're called random pool jumps. So you know you're going to have to do all of the formations in the random pool sooner or later. You don't know what order they're going to be in.
For those viewers who have joined our program in progress, we're discussing this evening National Champion Skydiving. Our guest is Jeff Regg, who happens to be one of the members of the four-man National Champion Skydiving team. Jeff, the next question that I would like to ask, I hope is not an offensive one. From some material that I gathered, I discovered that you don't have to be 20 years old and 6'4" and weigh 190 pounds and be in perfect health to be a skydiver or to be involved in parachuting. I was looking through an Esquire magazine on this subject, and the lady who was in one of the articles said that she had a bad back and she had very uncertain ankles. In addition to that, she could not drive a car because she had a deficit in depth perception, yet she was into parachuting. In relation to that got me to thinking that many people of different physical sizes and conditioning and also different ages could become involved in parachuting. Is that correct?
Yes, we get a wide range, anywhere from the 80-pound little girls to the way too big older guys.
So it's not like some sports where conditioning is absolutely essential before even participating. I was looking into Sports Illustrated on this issue and found that, however, at many sites throughout the United States, they do require if a person is over 35 years old and weighs more than 175 pounds, that they use a 32-foot chute, indicating that they will come down easier because they're afraid of people breaking bones in an older age. Is that a requirement in any of the areas around here?
For the most part, it's just good PR to have as few people as possible breaking portions of their anatomy. In general, the bigger parachute you have, the softer you're going to come down. So whenever possible, the instructors will put on the biggest parachute available for their students. On very small persons, they get overwhelmed if they're jumping a very big parachute. It's so big on them, it controls them rather than vice versa. So you meet a happy medium, and definitely on bigger people at the Parachute Center at Osmo Para Center, where we jump a lot, they have 35-foot parachutes for bigger people, and they have 28-foot parachutes for smaller people.
Now, if you're no longer in instruction and you're on your own, then I would suppose, and you thought you were rather good, even you were at an older age, you're not restricted in what you can do, are you?
No, there are no requirements other than common sense, which seems to fail a lot of people, as to what kind of equipment you jump, what size of parachute you jump, or anything like that. The only requirement that the Federal Aviation Administration sets forth is that you must jump an approved reserve parachute on an approved harness. And they don't care what size that is as long as it's approved.
I hesitate to take time from the panel. I know they have a lot of other questions, and I'll make this rather rapid, but maybe since we're talking about parachutes, this would be a good time for you to show some of your equipment. You have brought some with you, and I know we can't see it on television in the same detail we could if our viewers were here, but would you take a little time to show what you have with you?
Sure. Okay, this is the basic component of every skydiver's equipment. This is we call this our rig, for lack of a better name. This contains both the main and the reserve parachute. The main parachute in the bottom half, the reserve parachutes in the top half. This whole thing, just to give you an example of where the technology has gone in recent years, 5 or 6 years ago, the lightest weight rig you could buy was about 35 pounds. 15 years ago, the lightest rig you could get was about 50 pounds. This rig weighs about 23 pounds. It's also much safer, much more reliable, and has a much higher rate of performance in general. This is how it's worn. I won't put it on all the way. You can see both the main and reserve are worn on the back. This is called the tandem, or more popularly, the piggyback configuration. It leaves the front of your body clean, except for, generally speaking, an altimeter, which is a useful piece of equipment. It tells you how high you are off the ground. And it's comfortable, it's well padded. Skydiving isn't a masochist sport at all. People who skydive are lazy. They like to do things comfortably, and it's easy. To see how we open our main parachute on this particular assembly, on the right leg, I have a little knob here, and when I want to open my main parachute, I pull this out. Now, this isn't just a wad of garbage. This is a little parachute. It's called a pilot chute, and when I pull that out and let it go at 120 miles an hour, you can imagine that would generate a reasonable amount of drag. When that goes, it just whips this off and opens up the main container, and then pulls out that bag. This bag has my main parachute in it. If, in the unfortunate and hopefully rare event that the main parachute doesn't work, we always wear the other one. Remember, I said the reserve parachute was in the back also. Okay, if the main parachute doesn't work, I have a handle on the front here that I pull. This releases me from the main parachute, and I go back into free fall. Now, this was a significant advance in skydiving. It's called the cutaway method. You go back into free fall, and you have no more possibility of your reserve parachute entangling with your main parachute. So you're back into free fall, and here's the world-famous ripcord. You just pull this out, and there's a spring-loaded pilot chute in the reserve container in the back that springs out and pulls the reserve parachute out. It's designed and built to be far more reliable than the main parachute, obviously, because it's your last chance. The most important part of a skydiver's apparel, though, is not his rig. It's his jumpsuit. Now, the jumpsuit, I had a lady ask me, how come it's so baggy? Well, the more fabric you have, the more air you can control with it. This is one of our team jumpsuits. These are our individual team logos on them. Each individual's logo on the team is different colored so that we can recognize each other at a glance in free fall. The jumpsuit's made out of heavy cotton for durability. A custom-made jumpsuit costs usually about $100 a piece. And each one on our team is designed as a flying unit to fly with the other 3 members of the team so that we can fall together with minimum effort. We have specifically, notice, a real lot of material in the armpit area. This is called the wing area of the jumpsuit. And that's when you want to fall the slowest you can, you inflate the wing by holding the arm out, like that. And when you want to fall faster, you bring your arm in a little bit, and it just gets tucked up, and you fall faster. So you can vary your rate of descent by use of the jumpsuit anywhere from 100 or 90 miles an hour or so up to 180 miles an hour by standing on your head and going straight down. And that's skydiving equipment.
Thank you. Lou Reed.
Well, Jeff, I like those kind of fancy sleeves on that baggy jumpsuit, and you're making it sound like a lot of fun. If I decided I wanted to try this, and I went out to a field where they give skydiving lessons, what would I expect for a weekend package?
Across the country, you can pay anywhere from $50 to $100 for what most people would call the first jump course. Here up at Osmo Para Center, where I jump, the cost is $65, which is pretty middle of the road, and they provide your training and your equipment and the ride up and your first jump. That's good. Most people wouldn't have their own equipment, so they provide it. It's like a ski area. They have what you need. You just go show up there with the money, and they'll take care of you, and they'll take your money.
How much training am I going to get?
Okay. It depends on the size of the class and the receptivity of the class. Generally, about 5 or 6 hours of training, some of it classroom training, some of it more physical training on how to land, for example. It's not that complicated.
What are the important points that they're going to try to get across to me in order to get me through this first jump?
They break the training down into several main categories. One of the most important ones is emergency procedures. While they're very rare to be able to have to use them for students, if you didn't teach students what to do in case of emergency, you'd lose almost everyone that was confronted with an emergency. Okay, so there'd be emergency procedures, there would be how to land, there is a certain amount of technique involved with hitting the ground properly when you descend under your parachute, and how to exit the aircraft. A lot of people, if you didn't explain to them some basic human aerodynamics, would just tumble out of control when they jumped out of an airplane. There are some very basic things that we teach students: how to control their bodies, how to deflect air with their arms and legs so that they do what they want to do, not what the random chance of the air blowing by them says they'll do.
Are you familiar with the term brain lock?
Oh, yes.
Is this something that goes with skydiving? I talked to someone who said that he climbed out on the wheel of the airplane, and then that was all he remembered until the ground came up to him. Why does this happen, and how frequently does it happen?
Brain lock, yes. I don't really know that's another term. I don't know where it came from, but it's quite appropriate in skydiving. The whole essence of skydiving is your brain tells your body what to do, and if your body does it right, your task will get done. If your brain doesn't function properly, your body may end up spinning on its back through the air. It's very common in a high-stress situation for the mind to revert to a more natural state, a less stressful situation. For example,
A stupor?
That's good. Most people, if you were just to take them, put them in a black bag, take them up in the air, not even tell them you were going to throw them out of an airplane, and then take them out of the bag and pitch them out of the airplane, would probably resort to a fetal position. They just retreat way back. And brain lock is a slightly advanced state of that. You don't revert to a fetal position, but you don't remember what you did. You don't know why you did something. It's just a temporary dysfunction of the brain due to stress.
Have you ever experienced this during a fall or previous to a fall?
Oh, probably. There are different degrees of brain lock, too. Very frequently, just a slight miscalculation that's humorous would be referred to as a brain lock. I don't want to give you the idea that a brain lock is like rapture of the deep where you're going to just lose control of your ability to save yourself. That's not how brain lock works for the most part. Well, in any case that I've heard of it. It's a phenomenon associated with just the stress of early jumping.
Well, back to my weekend training, what are my chances of coming out unscathed? What are the statistics?
Pretty good. Don't ask me to back these up. A lot of these are ballpark figures. As far as the malfunction of the main parachute goes, I would say that you would have significantly less than a 1% chance of a malfunction of the main parachute, which is pretty good. That is governed almost exclusively, not totally, almost exclusively by how well you exit the airplane, which is, it's incumbent on you as a student to learn your lessons well, and if you do that properly, your chances will be even less than 1% of having a malfunction. As far as the most common thing, everybody who doesn't know much about skydiving thinks that skydivers all break at least one leg at least once a year. That's what most people think. That's not the case. I've got a lot of jumps and I've never broken anything, never even hurt myself. And as a first jump student, you'd have, boy, it's hard to lay out a statistic on breaking a bone, but on the small side of 5%, I'm sure, percent chance of breaking anything. Once again, that's all goes back to how well you learn your lessons. People, especially students who hurt themselves or have a bad experience in skydiving, do it almost always because they made a mistake.
My brain lock, but on the other hand, I'd come up with a terrific story.
Yes, yeah,
that's why people
really,
do it.
Yeah, it's good over cold beers at night.
Ken Wright.
The brain lock thing intrigues me a little bit. I want to ask about this a little bit more. Is there any, does the person still function? They just don't remember what's going on? In other words, you've got to pull the release on the main chute, and again, you have to pull the ripcord on the reserve chute. Is there any safety device at all in case the person fails to do either one of these things, that the altimeter sets it off?
Yes. For students, at the vast majority of parachute centers, they've got a variety of safety devices. The primary one is called the Sentinel Automatic Opener, which is a nifty little electronic gadget that's hooked onto their reserve parachute that senses both their altitude above the ground and their rate of descent, so that if they get to, if they pass through 1,000 feet above the ground and they're still descending too fast, it will, if it works properly, automatically open their reserve parachute. And those have saved numerous lives. There are a couple other safety devices. For the most part, students, let's back up a little bit here. They have to do at least the first 5 jumps anywhere in the United States are what we call static line jumps, where there's a line attached from the airplane directly to the main parachute. And as they fall away from the airplane, the main parachute's pulled out. There's no positive action on their part at all that is required to open the main parachute. It's just like falling off a log. You fall off the log and it's going to pull your main parachute out for you.
Well, this occurs quickly then, so the student doesn't free fall very far at all.
That's right. The main parachute is open within a couple of seconds.
It's essentially just an initial parachute jump then.
On my first jump, for example, I have no real recollection of what happened between the time I let go of the airplane and when my parachute opened. I remember being awful thankful when it did open. And I really do seriously wonder what I would have done in the event of some sort of equipment difficulty. I'm confident, though, that I would have survived. Just the fact of the tug of the main parachute opening, it brought me back to reality right away. I don't want to, though, overemphasize this brain lock phenomenon. It's not that common. It's usually, the term is almost exclusively reserved for somebody just making a flub in free fall, and it's usually used towards experienced jumpers, where it's not really a blackout type phenomenon. It's just a mistake.
Unfortunately, we're close to the end of the program, only about 10 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions we want to get in, so I will ask a couple very quick and then return to the panel. One thing I found out from you, Jeff, was that throughout the United States, teams and groups do not stress or emphasize the same type of formations. Now, I believe there are certain things that are done in Idaho that puts it number one in the country in that area. What are some of the differences from one part of the country to another one, what they stress, in especially the team skydiving?
That's a good point. In the less populous skydiving areas, by populous I mean fewer skydivers rather than population in general, the four-man competitors do better because it's easier to get 4 guys together for a team than it is 8 guys for an 8-man team or 10 guys for a 10-man team. So areas like that generate more 4-man teams, and they generate more good 4-man teams, and that's helpful in Idaho. The maneuvers and the formations that are done, they're very regional also. In Idaho, for example, and a lot of the rest of the country didn't even know it. We've been for a good solid 2 years or more doing upside down formations, which weren't done anywhere really prior to that. And Idaho, to the best of my knowledge anyway, has been in the forefront, if you can use that term when applying upside down, talking about upside down relative work. And there have even been some competitions down in Boise for the last 2 years on upside down skydiving.
Another very quick philosophical question that Lou started the program out with, and I'll return to her then. I know you gave her an answer why you went into skydiving, because you were bored and nothing to do, but on this program we've interviewed people who've climbed the highest mountains in the world. We've interviewed people who have snow skied all over the world in some of the most challenging places. And I still think there's more behind why one does this than being bored. There's so many things to do. Could you shed a little more light on why do people do things that we would describe as somewhat unusual that the average citizen doesn't do every day? Is there something about the human being and one's nature that cause them to challenge some of the more probably exciting and challenging elements of nature? Does this have anything to do with it?
Yeah, certainly there's some subtle little characteristic in somebody's psychological makeup that makes them want to do something like that. I can't, contrary to popular belief, I don't think skydivers all have death wishes or they all hate their mothers or anything like that. I view it as an artistic expression, really. And to anybody that's been there, or you might have seen on the movie, it's got a lot of visual and spatial satisfaction. It tweaks a little nubbin in your brain that likes it, and it just generates a satisfied feeling, and that's what keeps people in it. What starts them is another thing. It's hard to get on that one.
Lou Reed.
Jeff, I gather that you enjoy the free fall part more than the parachuting part. But aren't there some people who really thoroughly enjoy the parachuting and think that the precision of hitting a target and the floating down is more fun than free falling? Can you talk about that a second?
Yeah, the accuracy, the guiding of your parachute to the target was really the main emphasis of the sport for many years, and the relative workers were the bad boys when they started doing that, and there are, I'd say now, far less than 10%, far less than 5% of the active skydiving population in the United States would consider accuracy the main ingredient of their skydiving.
But do you enjoy the accuracy part to some extent, and how do you achieve this, really? How do you work those shrouds to get down on the target?
Yeah, I find it satisfying. It adds another aspect of satisfaction to the sport. If I wasn't interested in it at all, my jump would be over when my parachute opened. Since the two don't conflict, you have to do them both on every jump. It's easy to develop some satisfaction from both of them, and there's a certain amount of skill involved in guiding your parachute, and therefore, when you do it properly, you derive a little satisfaction from it. When you do it improperly, you pay the price.
Is there a danger of slipping the air out? Has the parachute been perfected so that that's not a problem?
No, with the modern airfoil-type gliding parachutes, there are a very specific set of circumstances that one can generate that will collapse your parachute. However, those circumstances are easily controllable for the most part, and one ensures that one doesn't set up those circumstances close to the ground, because the parachute in all cases reinflates very soon after it deflates. And this deflation phenomenon is not something that can happen to student-type parachutes. It's only the advanced-type parachutes that'll do that.
Thank you.
Ken Wright.
Jeff, I'd like to ask you about the media in skydiving. We've seen on the film here, film clip we had, that a pretty good representation of the kind of visual aspects of skydiving, but I think you've got some opinions about the way the media represents your sport in general.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us how you view that?
I'm glad you got into that. For the most part, after I got involved in skydiving, I got more and more disenchanted with media representations of the sport. Primarily, people see it as a vehicle to dramatize situations in which some poor guy is in a situation that he has no control over. And that's not the case at all in skydiving. People that hurt themselves do it because they made a mistake in the overwhelming majority of circumstances, not exclusively, but usually. And the classic example that I bring up is the show The Bionic Woman. The lead-in to that show and the premise of the Bionic Woman's injury was that she was skydiving, and she was the victim of an accident. The way they portrayed that accident, it was totally unrealistic and not a situation that would arise in skydiving. And yet there are kids out there who are just wildly enthusiastic about the show, and they see that happening, and they see that poor girl, who is obviously highly skilled and qualified, become a victim of circumstances. Therefore, they don't want to skydive. It happened to the Bionic Woman, and she's lucky she lived. And the skydiving is used as a dramatic vehicle in the media as a rule, and even in the newspapers, for example. Almost the only newspaper coverage is over skydiving accidents. Very little coverage in general on the good points of skydiving. Somebody has an accident and they injure themselves seriously or die, that gets quick coverage. And for the most part, articles that aren't closely guarded by people who are intimately involved with the sport very rapidly degenerate to the point where they give the reader the impression that the injured or deceased person was strictly a victim of circumstances, which is almost never the case in skydiving.
I'm sorry to have to interrupt, but again, we're out of time. Jeff, on behalf of our staff, I want to express our appreciation. It's been a very informative and very enjoyable program, and we've all learned much, and I'm sure the viewers would say the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will be with us later this month when we're going to do two other special programs. One's going to be a Christmas program on literary poetry type work, and then we're going to do a New Year's program which we're going to review the happenings of 1978. I am Tony Stewart. Good evening.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.